Welcome to the Perfect Place to Put a Practice podcast by Scott McDonald and DrDemographics.com, the best source of demographic, psychographic, and marketing information for professionals.
Hello, this is Scott McDonald of DrDemographics.com, and we're doing our weekly briefing, so to speak. Today, our topic is going to be on, something I think is kind of important, and it's the niche practice, or niche, as some people pronounce it. What the niche practice is, it just means that you're not going to be practicing according to the same, products, services, methods that everybody else has done. And there are lots of reasons why this is a good idea. Part of the thing is you may not be interested in doing things exactly like the guy next door or down the street or in the building. You may be looking at doing treatment modalities that are different, a range of services that are unique. You may be combining or excluding certain clinical practices within your offerings. So let's just say we're taking the population that you're serving and examining what do they need and what do they want. Now, there are lots of ways that we can look at the population that is going to come to a niche office. Some that you are probably already aware of. I mean, let's talk about holistic practices for a minute. Holistic practices may involve a wide variety of things, including diet and exercise and lifestyle training. And it may involve certain clinical diagnoses that are unique to you. There may even be services that you have created yourself. Now, the question is this: where do I put a niche practice? How do we know if this is a good place for it? And I want to talk to you about the theory of this because I don't know anybody else who really talks about niches very much. There was a time, really in the 80s, where a lot of people were experimenting with making their practice truly unique. And then we kind of got into a thing in the 90s where everybody was trying to standardize what they were offering. There was supposedly a best practice for how to promote your practice and where you want to put it. And then we kind of got a little further along, and that wasn't quite the model anymore. So we're going to talk about niche practices, what to do, where to put them, and what is going to work in your particular case as far as location is concerned. So here we go. Now, again, we're not trying to recommend there's specific niches that you need to pursue. Rather, I'm saying if you have a niche practice, this is how you can figure out where to put it. Now, there is a rising demand for less traditional practice. People want things their own way. Patients and vendors and even doctors don't want to go along with somebody else's pattern. This is nothing new, of course. For centuries, doctors have sought to meet the needs of a narrow cross-section of society. And one of those that naturally comes to mind is the naturopathic doctor. And they have a tradition of serving their patients with less conventional treatments, but are still reliable clinically, according to the science, but they don't necessarily fit everybody else's pattern. There are doctors who cater to patients with language, culture, lifestyle, and or national proclivities that may not be considered in the mainstream. I actually want to talk about some of those and recommend that we take a look at the demographics and psychographics of your area to say, is everybody else doing the same thing? And maybe if I don't do exactly what they're doing, that would be a good thing. These are the rising niche practices whose primary focus may not be presented to the average practice. So let's say you want to go off the rails a little, you want to bring somebody else in that might be a subspecialty or an emphasis. I want you to feel that this may be the smartest move you can make in a crowded market. What makes a niche practice location favorable is their definition. Now listen, they actually serve only a relatively narrow segment of the public. A niche practice is doing exactly the opposite of going after everybody. They want to get a narrow group of people and make those people so loyal to you that they will keep referring their friends and keep coming back to you for a long time. They can be identified demographically or psychographically. So when I say demographically, I mean the typical things like age and income, education, but psychographically means they have certain tastes or desires that are unmet. And sometimes people really like the people that they meet doing this. I'll explain a little bit later as we go on. Now, in other words, the things that define them are the very things that make them different from the mainstream practice. How they attract their patients is baked into the cake of their identity. Now, you can tell as we begin to go through these niches that there are some people who are going to be fantastic for your practice and some people that are not, and some locations that will be wonderful and some locations that are, well, have the kiss of death. I think you get the message. Now, you cannot appeal to everyone. I want to emphasize this. If you think somehow that I've got the do-all, end-all, and everybody's going to love me, you're going to be disappointed. That doesn't happen. A successful practice will know who the target is. So often you're looking for people that have a common need or a common background, and you're applying your clinical skills to helping them get what they want. Research continues to demonstrate that there are many ways to ethically treat patients. There's not one way. So when the American Medical Association came along and the American Dental Association, they tried to say there is one way to do things right. And I'm not sure that's really fair. Perhaps some real life examples, I'm sure that's going to help everybody understand what I'm talking about. Now, what are examples of niches? Well, look, the easy route is to say, I've got an ethnic group that needs particular care. Now, they may not be like everybody else, but they themselves think of themselves as unique, and what they want and need may not be like what their neighbor wants. American Indians, Native Americans, very often, based on their tribe, will say, I want to go to somebody who understands my tribe, my affiliation. And it may not be like the guys next door. It could be the holidays or the language or the customs they have that are unique. And that's really what we're talking about, meeting people on the level that they want to be on. So I'll use the example of Armenians. There are about 6 million Armenians in the United States that identify with being Armenian. You probably know that they're in the Southwest Asian area. But there has been a diaspora of Armenians. They have scattered all over the globe, in fact. But there are some countries that seem to attract more of them. And in those countries, there are neighborhoods that are like Armenian neighborhoods. And I'll talk about one in just a second. But I want you to understand, they don't have to be huge in number, but a practice can survive and thrive on them because they have a lot in common culturally and in terms of their self-reflection of who they think they are, their identity, if you will. So there are lots of religious groups that are also mostly ignored in the United States right now. And I find that kind of interesting. If you're trying to build a patient base, going to people who are fellow worshipers or have a particular culture or an imperative of belief, you'd be wise to consider what it takes to get those people in. And I'll just give you two. One is the SDA or Seventh-day Adventists and the LDS population. Now, let's talk about Seventh-day Adventists. Let's say you're Seventh-day Adventist, or you really appeal to their ethic and you've got a lot in common. The obvious way to go is to be close to an academy. The SDA academies are scattered throughout the United States, usually where there are a large number of SDAs. They typically live a lot longer than the average person. They're usually more affluent. They have something in common that So I'll take, for example, the idea of the SDAs not eating meat. So there's a whole lifestyle that goes around that. Plus, by the way, the SDAs regularly exercise, and they prefer going to other SDA doctors who might be associated with the community. That's very common, or it used to be very common in America, that you would tend to go to a practice that was of your religious persuasion. Then let's talk about the LDS population. They are a growing religion. And by the way, in America, when there is growth, that is very unusual because most religious organizations are in fact shrinking. The LDS population is growing, but they're growing in two ways. One is they have an active convert relationship, and the other is they have a large number of children. So with those two growth statistics in their favor, they make a very good population to go to. But they don't want you to mock them, and they want you to respect their beliefs. And very often professionals who are themselves LDS will naturally attract people who they've met at church. Incidentally, LDS people are one of the few religions in America that you will go by parochial area, meaning they tend to cluster together in demographics, but geographic areas like wards and stakes. So they know each other, which is a perfect situation for many professionals to go to. And of course, it helps that so many SDAs and LDS people have gone into healthcare. The SDA programs that they have, undergraduate and also professional schools, are really quite profound. They're doing some great work. Many of them are running clinics and provide the services, not just to themselves, but to other people who admire what they're doing. So I'm just going to say religion is a good niche for you to go to, especially if you represent part of that niche yourself. They're not the only niches, however, and not the only religions. But in a community where people have a common ethic, it certainly makes a niche worth pursuing. Now, I want to talk about immigration niches. We have got, well, up to 3 million people who come to the United States from other countries in the last 2 years. That's huge. Now, these people, for the most part, are hardworking and they're willing to take risks. That's why they came here. Remember, the lazy immigrants didn't come. And this is the history of people who come to the United States to seek a living. They're willing to risk something in what they're doing. But you see, one immigrant group is really quite different from other immigrant groups. So, for example, the country of origin, if you happen to have people from Burma or Myanmar or Australians or, well, are European, Northern European or Southern European, they are attracted to people who understand their immigration niche, their country of origin, their traditions, even their language. Now, you don't have to be so recently removed to the United States to still retain some identity for the population you're with. Now, my background is Scottish. I have a lot of family members who are right off the boat Scots. Does it matter? Is there a real different way of talking than Scots? No, but there is a national identity for the country of origin, and it makes people feel somehow there's a natural connection that you have. All right. American communities are another niche. Now, you may be a little surprised what I'm talking about. There's a book called Bowling Alone by Robert D. Putnam. It's just had another publishing. It's really quite an amazing book. Putnam was in a bowling alley in the middle of the night. 24-hour bowling was a thing. And he couldn't understand what happened to the bowling leagues that used to exist here? Nobody's in a league. What happens to the affiliation that people have with other people of similar interests? If we talk about Freemasons, Job's daughters, or the D. Malay, to the people who are part of that community, they understand what it means to have that because they put their ethical beliefs very high, and they don't want to be dishonest, and they want to be admired by their co-believers or people who have a membership in their organization. We have had recently a couple of changes. Black Lives Matter is, by the way, an American community. It's primarily Marxist. It obviously, Black is primarily it, fundamentally liberal. By contrast, there are other people on the Christian right. Often they belong to a megachurch or to an evangelical congregation, and they themselves form an American community. The niche that I'm talking about is based upon, well, in this case, not just a religion, but also a philosophy or a belief system. When that happens, and if you're a member of that, you can get involved in that niche and really make an impact upon the members of it. Now, often they're going to fall within three categories. There's a political niche of American communities, an economic niche, and maybe belonging to a country club or a political organization, or educational background. Now, this may surprise some people, probably not the doctors, but when you go to a medical school or a dental school of some kind, you identify with that for a very long period of time. It sets up a community of Americans that have something in common. By letting people in those organizations know that you are belonging to them, that you're a co-believer, that you want to have that philosophy, well, people are more likely to come to you. Now, I haven't talked about clinical expertise at this point. I'm merely saying people, if they identify with the community that you're in, you've got a winner. Now, demographic and psychographic divisions are a little bit different. For example, in the United States, we have a large number of communities that are 55 years of age and older. The Del Webb communities, for example, that forms the basis of a demographic group, people of that age group, that is going to be very loyal to you. But keep this in mind. Just because people are old, and I mean over 55, doesn't mean that they're going to identify with people who are 75 years of age and older. That's a different senior community. But demographically, they're a little compatible, but each age segment, each age cohort has a different group it relates to, including the doctors. Are there people who have a common psychographic interest? Now, there are, well, let's put them at more than 70 psychographic groups. These are lifestyles. They live near each other. They tend to have hobbies that are similar. They even drive similar vehicles or use the same kind of transportation. The decisions that they make are based on values. They call the study of psychographics a Val's study. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but if you have an area that you want to practice in, I can tell you what the primary demographic characteristics of the population is, as well as the psychographics. Where do they go to school? What do they think is important? How do they want their children to live? And knowing this, a lot of these people will have children of similar backgrounds and come from similar places. So if you know the demographics and psychographics, you can, in fact, appeal to the values of that community. But don't assume that everybody is the same or that they value the same things. They don't. So we're looking for people who believe the same things and offer services to them in a way that they consider beneficial to them. Now, ultimately, you may ask yourself, what's the best location for my niche practice? How am I going to find people who want to have what I have? And the answer is obvious. A demographic or psychographic research can tell you that. If you know you want to serve Armenians, we can tell you where they live. We can tell you where the greatest population of them might be. If you want to find software engineers, or you're looking for people who are university professors, all these things they have in common, and they form a cluster, so to speak, geographically and psychographically, around a specific concept. You can then form a practice that might appeal just to college professors. And yeah, believe it or not, they don't want the same thing as blue-collar workers, even if they're making a lot of money. Accessibility, then, is the best location you can find for your particular niche. I'm not saying you have to be close to them. I am saying you have to be available to them. You've got to have accessibility. Now, let's imagine there's an ethnic group that might be one particular country of origin. I can find where those people are. And if you put your practice in a site that is accessible to them, doesn't have to be right in their neighborhood, you can build your patient base on that niche. And this can be extremely helpful and important to what you're trying to do. Now, just one simple warning, there are certain factors about, well, a niche that will discourage people from coming into that office because it runs counter to their ethic. A political party that is primarily liberal will have a hard time attracting conservative people, and vice versa. If it looks like people are being antagonistic toward people of a particular point of view, it doesn't have to be a race. Very often, it's going to be a belief system. And the country has been dividing itself into smaller segments that follow, well, where people feel like they can find others who are like them. Target sites that have a natural imperative, such as a landmark that might be near a church or a favorite ethnic restaurant, believe it or not, is actually desirable. Now, I'm going to go back to the religion thing. SDAs happen to often be associated with the academy. Now, the academy is where they educate their children. They have cultural events. They have religious extension that goes on there, and it's kind of a nice thing. The LDS Church, if you happen to be near a temple, and that in itself is a gathering place for people of that religion, that's in your best interest. Let's say you happen to be Southeast Asian. Now, there are suppliers of Southeast Asian products, goods, and services that are unique. In fact, we happen to have one not too far from us, where they will have 15 different kinds of ramen noodles. Well, who needs 15 kinds? Well, maybe they do. Maybe they are brand loyal, and it's the only place they can find what they want. Therefore, having a geographic affiliation with the landmarks, churches and restaurants, vendors of things, rather makes sense. So I'm not trying to exclude anybody. We're trying to identify who you might go after because they're similar. I also want to point out that very often signage and advertising, like direct mail, that will target to a particular subset of the population certainly helps. If you have, for example, a Korean background, and you have been attracting Koreans for a while, you understand many of them, even those who are not native speakers, will identify it as something that they're familiar with, they like. The same thing is true of languages in signs. Sometimes images and the names of practice themselves, like golden apple for many Chinese, is a good thing. These are symbols of good luck. If you don't know that, you're not going to be able to serve that niche well. But I think people are going back to their roots, and this is a thing that's kind of changing. So let me read the tea leaves for a minute and predict what I think is going to happen in the future. And I think it might be of interest to you. Now, here's the thing. Niche practices will likely increase as competition increases and the competition narrows. I mean by that people are going to cluster closer together as it looks like nobody's clustering. We're all looking for people who are familiar to us and relate to what we believe in. Opportunities will occur in new population or as new populations enter the United States. But remember this, in the baby boomer years, everybody was trying to live to a certain standard that, like everybody else. But in fact, that is reversing itself at this time. And baby boomers are not becoming standardized. They want you to meet their needs because they're often living near, but not very near, people of a similar mindset and habits. Now, yesterday's success will not guarantee tomorrow's success. Niches invariably change as culture changes. So there was, for instance, a large population of Hmong. Now, the Hmong were Vietnamese or Laotian hill people. Not many people are Hmong culturally as they used to be, even 10 years ago. But with that change, there's another group of people that comes in and is interested in a particular pattern of living in life. So it's something you can change or grow with. But first of all, I want you to think about your own cultures, your own background, your own niches that you're interested in. There is nothing that makes a patient happier than having their doctor understand them and what they want and what they need. So whether it's a political party, whether it's foods, holiday observance or whatever, you can do a tremendous amount to attract the core of a practice. Now, remember, I'm not suggesting these niche practices have to exclude everybody else, but I am saying it's a very good idea for you to identify who wants to come to you already and to build your practice based upon that. Now, Dr. Demographics, we pay a lot of attention to it. We've got the research to tell you not just how many doctors there are in the area and the population. We can tell you who they are and what they value. And that's one of the most important things we can do. So if you're a specialty practice, this is particularly important. But even general practices benefit from knowing something about the backgrounds of the people they're serving and how to organize your practice in such a way so that you're not running uphill to attract people to your office. If you'd like more information, please visit us at drdemographics.com. The Practice Site Viability Report and the Best Sites Report are particularly good for this purpose. And visit us also, or give us a call at 800-849-0499. Give Mike Green a call, and we'd be happy to talk you through these issues. And thank you very much for listening.